I'm Adam Richardson, and this is the Writers Detective Bureau. Welcome to episode 130 of the Writers Detective Bureau, the podcast dedicated to helping authors and screenwriters write professional quality crime-related fiction. This week, we are helping one writer with an interesting series of questions about an undercover FBI investigation, getting an inmate out of prison, pyromaniacs, and gun types. But before we get into that, I first wanted to say thank you for all the kind words, prayers, and condolences I received about the loss of my father-in-law. He was a great man, and I am so lucky to have listeners like you. It's crazy to think that a guy sitting alone in his home office talking into this microphone can connect with so many great people around the world. I am thankful for each and every one of you. Thanks for making the Bureau so inclusive and supportive. You guys are awesome. And speaking of you being awesome, and me getting out of this office to meet you in person, my good friend Patrick O'Donnell from the Cops and Writers podcast has invited me to teach at his upcoming 2023 Cops and Writers Interactive Conference, which his wife affectionately dubbed Cop Camp. I think that name's going to stick. Registration is $350 or $325 for early bird signups, and it's being held June 1st through the 4th, 2023 in Appleton, Wisconsin at the Fox Valley Technical College and Police Academy. The host hotel has a group rate of $99 a night plus tax and other fees, and that hotel is the DoubleTree by Hilton Appleton, located in Appleton, Wisconsin. So Patrick is partnering up with RJ Beam, an instructor at the Academy and published author, to put on this conference. And as I release this episode on March 1st, 2023, the registration page is not even up yet. But once it's active, you'll be able to find it by going to writersdetective.com/Cop Camp. I told you that the Cop Camp name's going to stick. We have an amazing lineup of speakers, including Pulitzer Prize nominee Anne E. Schwartz. So she will be speaking. She's the reporter who broke the Jeffrey Dahmer story and wrote the best-selling book Monster, the true story of the Jeffrey Dahmer murders. We'll also have Honoré Corder in the house. Honoré is a publishing strategist, TEDx and keynote speaker, and author of over 50 books, including You Must Write a Book and You Must Market Your Book. I hope you can make it because I would love to meet you in person. All right, let's get to our questions. So our questions come from Donovan Gomez, who writes, I'm publishing a novel about a teenager who was part of a gang in Philadelphia, got away with millions in jewelry, and then used that money to hide in plain sight as a celebrity in California. The FBI began a covert investigation into this teenager, but he killed the undercover agent in charge of trying to befriend him and get evidence through poisoning. Later in the novel, the partner of the FBI agent who was killed is told by the director that as a punishment for his leaving his partner by himself, he would have to finance his own investigation and catch the teenager without FBI resources. The FBI agent then goes to Pelican Bay Prison and uses the fact that he's an FBI agent as a threat to release an associate of the teenager to help him with his investigation. As the novel continues, he uses his FBI badge to have local law enforcement from various states help him catch the teenager, since the teenager is running from state to state. Is there any way to make this realistic? The book is practically written, and in hindsight, I should have done more research. Relatively new listener to the podcast, but I love it already, and it's been a great help. Thanks for everything. First of all, welcome to the Bureau, Donovan. We're happy to have you, especially with such a fun and high-stakes story to tell. But as you've rightly guessed, we aren't totally in the realistic realm, at least not yet. So let's start by looking what goes a bit beyond a typical reader's disbelief level and how we can fix that with some alternatives that will hopefully be just as interesting for the story. To be clear, I don't want to sound like I am picking on Donovan. These are exactly the kinds of high stakes and ticking clocks that the stories in our genre need to have. But the key is to keep them realistic enough to keep the reader engaged. And I applaud you, Donovan, for your willingness to let me dissect this story and hopefully help you make it that much better than it already is. And I do have a surprise for you at the end. But let's start with a recap of what Donovan's laid out here and a few key points that I see really need some help. So I'll be sure to explain what would really happen in real life, as well as talk about how we can fudge things a little bit, where it may not be completely accurate as for real life, but as I've said before, real enough to keep the reader engaged and best serve the story, right? Story comes first, but there are a few things I'm a little worried about that we need to address. For starters, while I'm not suggesting you change this vitally important element of your story, but why an undercover investigation? I realize it sets up the whole wanted for killing an FBI agent aspect of the story. You know, that's a pretty significant drive to the story, but we legitimately put a lot of thought into the goals of our investigations. There has to be a very compelling reason to run this investigation using an undercover FBI agent as opposed to relying on surveillance and wiretaps. How does an undercover prove that someone stole jewelry in the past and converted it to cash after the fact? Again, I'm not asking this question to pick on Donovan. This is exactly the question that your main character would be asked by their supervisor when they suggest that this case can only be solved by introducing an undercover. Now, that does not mean that they can't do this. In fact, if you can come up with an even bigger reason, like there's an even bigger story for a subsequent novel that is not revealed to your reader yet, that could work. So I'm thinking like this whole undercover case is really about introducing an undercover into this kid's circle because he's actually the teenage son of a major crime boss. And the real goal was to get the UC, or the undercover, into the organization. And solving the jewelry case was just the tip of the iceberg, which isn't actually revealed to the reader until book 2. It's just that the killing of the UC throws a wrench in the FBI's plan. So what I'm trying to get here is that it has to be bigger than just a jewelry heist in order to get an FBI agent undercover into this group in reality. But more importantly, we want to set you up for book 2. We want to play chess, not checkers, with our plot lines. Moving on to another plot line, financing your own investigation is punishment, especially when it's the murder of an FBI special agent. I certainly see what you want to do here. But not only is the lone protagonist out for revenge an often used trope, you're probably going to lose your reader here for 2 reasons. Number 1, now this is a small nitpicky reason, and it's that if the agent died by poisoning, how is the boss of the FBI supervisor able to say it's the result of the partner leaving the undercover alone? It's not like he got shot. Plus, the nature of undercover work tends to be that you are alone and at the mercy of the folks you're embedded with. The partner, I'm assuming working as a handler, has to maintain their distance. It's just the nature of undercover work. And number 2, now this is the much bigger reason. If an FBI undercover special agent is murdered, I can tell you that not only would this be an official investigation, it would become a worldwide priority for the entire FBI. Spoiler alert for anyone that hasn't seen Narcos Mexico on Netflix or the 1990 miniseries Drug Wars, the Camarena Story, which was a Michael Mann production. But in our own real federal law enforcement history, we have had an undercover federal agent murdered. Kiki Camarena was an undercover DEA agent operating in Guadalajara, Mexico, and he was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered by the then existing Guadalajara drug cartel in February 1985. So the DEA searched for Kiki for 30 days before his body was dumped along a road in Sinaloa and discovered. This was such a major case that the U.S. government went so far as to nearly shut down the border between U.S. and Mexico in order to pressure the Mexican government into helping find their kidnapped DEA agent. I mean, affecting major aspects of trade because that's how important it was. I only say this to show how seriously huge the implications could be for the murder of a federal agent. So no, this is not going to be an off-book investigation conducted by an off-duty FBI agent. But not to worry, it's going to make for a great story. Now, moving on to the next point, I think I mentioned in a recent podcast episode that in reality, the FBI office in one area would send any leads outside of its AOR, which is Fed speak for area of responsibility, to the local FBI office where that lead was located. So like in our story, if the case starts in Philly, but there's a lead in LA, in reality, an agent in LA will get tasked with following up on that lead. But feel free to take some artistic license and have your main character do the traveling, because that's what your readers want to see happen. Just know that that doesn't really happen that way. So for that one, we can check that one off as no problem. Same thing to a certain extent for the trip to Pelican Bay. For those unfamiliar with Pelican Bay, it is a California state prison in Crescent City, California, which is along the California coast about 10 miles south of the Oregon border, so way far north, and it is a maximum security prison. Most of the maximum security prisoners there are in general population, but the worst of the worst are housed in the SHU, which is an acronym, SHU, or Security Housing Unit, which contains over 1,000 individual cells, home to the worst of the worst. If Hannibal Lecter were incarcerated in a California state prison, he'd be in the SHU at Pelican Bay. To get one of these inmates housed in the SHU released would require far more than flashing an FBI badge. But it is doable, likely in the form of a court order signed by a judge. And that release would be for a very specific purpose, like testifying in a murder trial. I realize we're doing it to try to find our teenager, but there would have to be a pretty specific goal, pretty specific operations plan, and a pretty convincing reason for a judge to sign off on this. Having been involved in the transport of high-risk prisoners from prison to court myself, I can tell you that moving someone like that would involve a multi-vehicle convoy packed full of SWAT Ninja Turtles, not a lone FBI agent. But I'm sure you can come up with a believable way for your character to manage this. But before you have the inmate in a transport, slip out the bathroom window of a motel in the middle of the night. How many times have we seen that? Just know that any overnight stay during travel would involve that inmate being booked into a local jail overnight, not getting a room at the local motor lodge. Okay, what's next? Donovan wrote, as the novel continues, he uses his FBI badge to try to have local law enforcement from various states help him catch the teenager, since the teenager is running from state to state. Yep. Assuming there's a warrant for the arrest of the teenager, which would very likely be the case, then yeah, the local cops would definitely help look for the teenager. Let's see. Donovan did send me a few additional questions, a second email as well, which were, the first additional question, I should say, what would classify someone as a pyromaniac? Well, according to WebMD, pyromania is a type of impulse control disorder that is characterized by being unable to resist starting fires. People with pyromania know that setting fires is harmful, but setting fires is the only way they can relieve their built-up tension, anxiety, or arousal. Now, that's the medical term, or definition, I should say, of pyromania. We in law enforcement actually refer to them as arsonists or serial arsonists. Because someone with pyromania has a higher likelihood of reoffending, much like a child molester, the courts can require a convicted arsonist to register as a known arsonist, no different than a convicted child molester is required to register as a sex offender. In fact, there are 3 types of criminal registrants: sex registrants, arson registrants, and narcotic registrants. If you've been court-ordered to register, your name and registration status will pop up anytime a police officer runs your name in the system. And by system, I put that in quotes. I'm really talking about NLETS, the National Law Enforcement Telecommunications System. Like on a traffic stop, when a driver's license status is checked, we run the name and date of birth of the driver. And that is also checked against those sex, arson, and narcotics registries, the domestic violence restraining order system, the warrant system, the probation and parole status, and even the terrorist screening center. So if you're a registered arsonist and you get pulled over for speeding, odds are the officer stopping you will find out that you're a registered arsonist pretty quickly. Now, a single arson conviction may not require someone to register as an arsonist, but a second arson conviction probably would. All right, the next extra question: who would respond to someone who's committed various fires in state and local areas? If a single arsonist appeared to be operating as a serial arsonist on a spree, I'd expect the investigators in each area where a fire was started would start working together in some sort of ad hoc team. Now, whether that is an investigator from the police department that works arsons, sometimes we have trained arson investigators in a homicide unit, or it could be a firefighter that is then also a sworn law enforcement officer that is an arson investigator. So it really depends on the agency that you're writing about, but figure out who handles arson investigations for that area. It could be the fire department that has sworn cops. Basically, they're firefighters that attend a modified police academy in order to get sworn as an arson investigator. Or it may be a detective from a police department that then goes to a specific type of fire investigation training to become an arson investigator. All right, supplemental question number 3. How do modern criminals commit gun running, and how do police catch them? Gun running is usually a matter of transporting weapons or weapon parts from one area of the country to another, usually through the theft of guns or through the purchase of guns through a straw purchaser. A straw purchase is when you get a third party, usually someone with a clean criminal record, to purchase the gun on someone else's behalf, essentially skirting the background check for the real purchaser. A straw purchase is a crime in itself in most states, to my knowledge at least, and you have to swear under penalty of perjury in the purchase paperwork that you're buying the gun for yourself. Now, granted, I'm in California, which is one of the most restrictive states when it comes to gun buying. So I'm sure there are other states where loopholes allow for straw purchasing, but legally doing a straw purchase in one state in order to bring it across state lines, like into California, in effect skirting background checks, would be an example of gun running. The way to catch them would be starting with whomever turns up with the gun and working your way backward to where it was purchased. The ATF does have the ability to run a serial number and determine where it was originally sold. And then hopefully through some sort of paper trail, you'd be able to figure out where the gun kind of started its life and then kind of work your way through to where it ended up as far as the cops encountering this gun out on the street. And then obviously just your typical detective work of talking to people, talking to the person that had the gun and figuring out where they got it from and running an investigation that way. Supplemental question number 4. What would a coroner do if they found unknown substances in a body? And then in parentheses, sci-fi. They'd likely note the substance as being an unknown substance in their report. Either that or they just wouldn't be aware that the substance was even present, as the toxicology, assuming we're talking about in the bloodstream, wouldn't register anything. Now, I will admit that the finer scientific points of toxicology are outside my expertise, but my basic understanding is that there's a panel of substances like metabolites of known drugs or poisons that are routinely checked for, and the lab result will just show positive or negative for the presence of those things listed in that testing panel. Now, if we're talking about a swab of a specific thing found on the body, like the predator's fluorescent green blood, and the lab can't identify what the heck the green glowing stuff is, it's likely just going to be noted in the lab report as an unknown substance. And finally, supplemental question number 5, can officers be trained on stronger and more powerful guns? Parentheses, Glock versus AK-47. Well, Glocks are handguns, which typically fire common handgun ammunition, which, depending on the model of handgun, might be 9mm, 40 caliber, or 45 ACP, whereas an AK-47 is an assault rifle, typically chambered in 7.62 millimeter. U.S. law enforcement officers typically carry rifles that are chambered in 5.56 NATO or .223, like the AR-15 or M4 variants of rifles. But what we can carry really comes down to department policy. If you're on the SWAT team, like if you're a sniper or you're on an entry team, you may have access to different weapons than, say, your typical detective or patrol officer. Now, I know I just threw a whole slew of numbers at you with little explanation as to what they mean, but I have a resource for you that will demystify all of that. And that's my Crime Fiction Guns online course. It's specifically designed for, you guessed it, crime fiction writers that have zero experience with guns or ammo. Most writers outside of the US don't have the ability to walk into a gun store or a shooting range and ask questions. And frankly, many of the writers in the US have little desire to do so. So I created this $69 course to explain everything you need to know to write about guns believably and not make any rookie mistakes in how you describe things in your writing, without having to listen to political opinions or the macho chest pounding of wannabe middle-aged mutant ninja seals. And as a bit of a surprise, to thank Donovan for being brave enough to let me pick apart his story like I did, Donovan, you're getting a free sign up for the Crime Fiction Guns course on me. So thank you for sending in your questions. But if the rest of you would like to get lifetime access to my Crime Fiction Guns course for just $69 US, go to crimefictionguns.com. I'll also link to the course in the show notes, which you can find by going to writersdetective.com/130. Thank you, Donovan, for sending me your questions. This podcast needs your writing questions, and you could submit them just like Donovan did by going to writersdetective.com/podcast. And I'd also like to thank my Patreon patrons for sponsoring this episode, especially my Gold Shield patrons, Deborah Dunbar from deborahdunbar.com, CC Jameson from ccjameson.com, Larry Darter, Natalie Borelli, Craig Kingsman of craigkingsman.com, Marco Carolcari of marcocarolcari.com, Rob Kearns of knightsfallpress.com, Robert Mendenhall of robertjmendenhall.com, Kaylee, and Mark Jacobs for their support, along with my Silver Cufflink and Coffee Club patrons. You guys are awesome. And you can find links to all of these patrons supporting this episode by going to the show notes at writersdetective.com/130. Thanks again for listening. Have a great week and write well.